Good evening in New York, good afternoon in British Columbia, Arizona, and California, good night in Edinburgh, Europe and Africa, good early morning in Australia and New Zealand, and welcome whatever time of day or night for all of you who are joining us from the rest of the world. I am Yael Danieli, founder and executive director of the International Center for the Study, Prevention, and Treatment of Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma, ICMGLT for short. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. The ICMGLT is headquartered where the Lenape lived before and during colonization of the Americas. We recognize these indigenous people of Manhattan, their displacement, dispossession, and continued presence. This International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma's webinar is held in partnership with the Hopi Foundation on August 9, the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. Indigenous participants from the 4 last United Nations member states to sign the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, that these are Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States, will reflect on the meaning of their country's delay, the meaning of the declaration for them and their communities, on whether and how their country's adoption of what we call UNDRIP affected their own and their families' lives, the governance of their communities, their relationships to their governments, fellow citizens, and others around the world, and their hopes for future generations. This webinar would not have happened if it weren't for the generosity and dedication of the Hopi Foundation director and member of the ICMGLT's working group on Indigenous Peoples, Monica Nuvamsa, board member and co-chair of the working group on Indigenous People, Neri Fabri, and Stan Rodriguez, who helped despite COVID. Your moderator, that is I, am a clinical psychologist, victimologist, traumatologist, and psychohistorian. I devoted much of my career to studying, treating, and preventing multi-generational impacts of massive trauma, to victims' rights, to reparative justice, that is justice that centers on the experience, on the victim's experience of justice, to rights of future generations, and to articulating history as it is lived rather than as it is written about. Our first presenter, Hannah McLeod, is from the Koorin-Minang people of Western Australia. Professor McLeod has specialized in international human rights law, worked for many Indigenous organizations and bodies, and established services for Indigenous women and children impacted by violence. A former senior Indigenous fellow at the Office of the High Commissioner of Refugees, of Human Rights, sorry. She has participated in many United Nations fora to promote Indigenous human rights in Australia, and is currently an associate professor at Curtin Law School. In 2020, she was appointed to the UN Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues, nominated by Indigenous peoples. Dr. Jeff Ganohalido, you all know to please forgive me for all my mistakes in pronunciation. Jeff Corntassel, our second presenter, is a writer, teacher, and father from the Cherokee Nation, the first to represent the Cherokee Nation as a delegate to the UN Working Group on Indigenous Populations. Jeff is a professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Victoria, located on unceded Lekwungen territory. His research and teaching focus on, quotes, everyday acts of resurgence and the intersection between Indigenous internationalism, community resurgence, climate change, gender, and community well-being. His forthcoming book on sustainable self-determination examines Indigenous climate, justice, food security, and resurgence. Third is Tawera Tahuri. Tawera will help me by, when you present, correctly pronounce what is under your name.
Ariki kai pūtahi, whakatohia, Ngāti Uenuku, and tūwharetoa.
Thank you so much, my friend. Tawera Tahuri is a mixed media artist covering a wide range of media and techniques. A mother of 6 children and grandmother of 6, she's actively involved in her community as an artist, activist, teacher, and performer, and senior advisor at Indigenous Exchange, CNZ. I'm sure you'll explain to people what it means. Please.
I work with the international team. I'm looking after the Indigenous Exchange portfolio for Creative New Zealand.
Thank you. Oh, so the C is creative. Thank you. That was what we couldn't figure out. As a board member for the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, Tawera is committed to Indigenous issues across the world and proudly represents her peoples alongside her wider Indigenous family. Fourth, from the village of Mungapi on the Hopi Reservation, Brian Monongai serves as vice chair for 7th Generation Fund, an artist, farmer, and active community member engaged in issues affecting his homeland, from water to mining resources. He has advocated for Indigenous peoples' issues both nationally and internationally, and is currently Hopi liaison for the Bears Ears Prayer Run Alliance, which seeks to unite the tribes who hold this area sacred by coming together as one through the power of running. Kwakwe. Last but not least is Stanley Ralph Rodriguez from the Santa Isabel Band of the Ipe Nations, a United States Navy Desert Storm veteran and California Indian Heritage Commissioner. Dr. Rodriguez is the director of Kumeyaay College, faculty member at Cuyamaca Community College, and adjunct faculty member at California State University, San Marcos. dedicated to educating Indigenous communities about Kumeyaay history, culture, and language. His passion to revitalize the Kumeyaay language and culture inspires his students to carry on the Kumeyaay traditions. We have 2 hours for the webinar. Each speaker will speak for between 8 and 10 minutes. Following an interchange among us, we will open the floor to questions or brief comments from the virtual audience. Panelists will then conclude with last words. Please use the chat function and we'll do our best to respond to as many as we can. Feel free to direct your questions to a particular panelist or the full panel. Hannah, are you with us?
He's still having technical difficulties.
Okay, so because Hannah has some technical issues with the sound, Jeff generously agreed to speak first. Please, Jeff, the screen is yours.
Well, thank you, Dr. Daniele. Thank you, the ICM GLT for sponsoring this. Thank you to my friend Monica Nuvamsa for getting this going as well. And I'll just introduce myself briefly and then kind of go into some of the questions that we're all here to talk about. So Osio Nigada, Jeff Ganoholido Corntassel Dagwadoa, Shalagia Yetli Egwenasa E, Echoda Galski Go E. So my name is Jeff Corntassel from Cherokee Nation. My Cherokee name is Ganoholido, which means hunter. And I'm here on the unceded Lekwungen and Wasanich territories, otherwise known as Victoria, British Columbia in Canada. And so, yeah, it's an honor to be here. I do want to say right off the top that I'm not speaking on behalf of Cherokee Nation. I'm not speaking on behalf of Canada. I'm not speaking on behalf of the university. I'm not speaking on behalf of any institution. I'm only speaking for myself in this panel. So, and I look forward to a really good engagement on this Indigenous Peoples Day. Yeah, I think, just right off the top, when I was asked to do this, I really wanted to point out how, we're still here, but also, that we're perpetuating our relationships to the land, to the culture, to the communities that we're a part of. And I just got back from Oklahoma, so my daughter and I take part in Green Corn. We belong to the Echota Grounds in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And, I'm happy to say that the ceremonies are strong. Our fire still burns strong. And, really this conversation for me is all about our future generations. I think of my 17-year-old daughter and the challenges that she faces. What kind of conversation will we have 10, 20 years from now? Will it be the same? Will it be much different? I hope it'll be much different. And so, that's the spirit in which I engage in this conversation today, and really thinking about the ways that we engage our relational responsibilities, that we have those inherent rights and responsibilities to our communities, to our culture, to our families, to all of our parts of the natural world. So with that said, I think, I mentioned that we have inherent rights and responsibilities. We're also inherently international in the sense that we've engaged in actions since time immemorial that transcend or even predate the state, predate countries like Canada, like the United States. And then even amidst the formation of, let's say, the League of Nations, for example, we have strong Indigenous participation from Desgahe, Chief of Six Nations. We have, Maori activist Rangatira, all going to places like Geneva, all going and engaging in those forms of diplomacy and protocol, so that our future generations can practice and affirm our self-determining authority. So this is all about self-determination. I have a long history with the UN Declaration. As mentioned, I was a delegate for the Cherokee Nation to the UN Working Group in the 1990s, and then also to the UN Permanent Forum in the early 2000s. So it's really honoring those struggles that have gone before us, but it's also about holding countries, holding particular parties accountable for the words that they use, for the actions, or in some cases inactions that they have engaged in. For Canada, I think, UNDRIP is really the culmination of a really long discussion, but also negotiation. And when you think about it, UNDRIP was really started in 1982, right? The formation of it as the UN Working Group was formed during that same year. And it was really not until 2007 that it came up for a vote for adoption. So we're talking 25 years. A lot of folks have said that the 2007 version bears little similarity to the earlier versions, namely the 1994 version. Charmaine Whiteface has done some really good work on that. That's for maybe future conversation. But nevertheless, it came up for a vote, and Canada, along with Aotearoa or New Zealand, Australia, and the United States all voted against it in 2007. Why did Canada vote against it? At the time, they claimed, the Canadian authorities claimed that it was incompatible with the Constitution. They claimed that free, prior, and informed consent would effectively be a veto over future projects, and that only collective rights were emphasized in this document. All of those things have been shown to be false. I'll cut to the chase here, given the interest of time. All of those things have been shown to be false. And it's really...
Jeff, please don't cut to the chase, because some people in the audience might not know. So it will help them learn. And
right.
Tawera, if you'd be kind enough, just like you did the first time the group met, would you share in the chat the particular instrument you recommended for people to read? Thank you. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. I'm just thinking of time here. So absolutely, we can talk about some of this, but Canada, like a lot of other countries, eventually reversed their position. 2010 endorsed the UN Declaration, but only saying it was aspirational. It was an aspirational document. 2016, Canada removed all further objections to UNDRIP and said that they were interested in implementation. Of course, during this time, we have in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission issues their 94 calls to action. This is a response to the horrors and the trauma of residential schools. Over 160,000 Indigenous children impacted by that, by those schools and by that policy, and issued those 94 calls to action. Of those 94 calls to action in 2015, only 11 have been acted on in 2023, right? So if we start to look for accountability, we see that there's been little action in this area. I mentioned the TRC because they also, one of their calls to action was to implement UNDRIP. Also in 2016, there was an inquiry, national inquiry for the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, as well as Two-Spirit and queer people. And they issued 231 calls for justice in 2019. If we again look at this as a report card, CBC has recently looked at the 231 calls for justice and found that only 2 have been acted on, right? So very little action. Then we come to 2019. DRIPA is passed in British Columbia, and then in 2021 there is Bill C-15, which is DRIPA at the federal level, which is currently in progress in terms of its implementation. So when we talk about Canada, we find that there is a lot of good public relations. There's a lot of good, I think, articulations of what rights can be, but very little action on the ground. And so I'll close it there just to be provocative, but also to give other people more time. So Wado, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Indeed, Tawera, you will be next, so you can help by putting things in the chat. And we are most eager to hear you about New Zealand. And please unmute. Hi.
Tēnā tātou. First of all, I'd just like to he mihi tēnei ki ngā rangatira, ngā mārei kura kua wehe, kua whetu rangitia. Those of our ancestors who did the good work, who have walked on. I just want to, who have now become stars in the universe. I just wanted to acknowledge them and the mahi that they have done. Also like to acknowledge as one of the shining stars amongst those, Matua Moana Jackson, and the work that he did with regards to the Māori involvement in the drafting of the UNDRIP, and really bringing to attention for Māori and for the rest of New Zealand the importance of the UNDRIP, and how in the face of constant belittling and obstructiveness by the governments, particularly the ones that Dr. Jeff has just spoken of, New Zealand, Canada, the US and Australia, he continued to fight alongside our Indigenous peoples for its ratification. And as someone who was on the front line, and he was also elected the chair of the Indigenous Peoples Caucus at the UN in 1990, we owe a lot as the Māori people within the who he has mentored, and I would also like to acknowledge Tina through self.
You're frozen, Tawera.
Sorry?
Oh, good. I thought you froze for a moment.
Oh, yeah. Tina Ngata, who brought to our attention through the help of other Indigenous peoples at the United Nations Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues, her work that she has assisted and led in the Māori space on the doctrine of discovery, also brought to attention the issues that arise through the doctrine of discovery and the effects really that it's had within that space, and how important those concerns, about that the discovery narrative has really underpinned the denial of Indigenous rights, I suppose you could say, but that there is a lot to be discussed within that space as well, and memorializing or glorifying some of those imperial expansions through colonization goes against where we want to be heading, and that they're really problematic. So just wanting to make sure that I acknowledge both Moana Jackson and Tina for their work that they have done. There's been so many others that have led in this space. We have, as Māori, been regularly travelling overseas since, or after 1840, to protest about the Crown not honouring the treaty, which included visits to Geneva and at the site of the then League of Nations in the 1920s. However, those early attempts were rejected by the governments in the League, and it wasn't until 1985 that enough governments in the United Nations finally agreed to the drafting of a declaration by establishing a working group on the rights of Indigenous peoples. Ironically, it was drafted in Geneva, where previous attempts to remedy the denial of Indigenous human rights had actually been rejected. So Māori people have played an important role in that process, which is often not being properly acknowledged. Other acknowledgements to people like Ngāneko Mihinik, her brother Alec Kaiho and his daughter Aroha, who were the first to participate with a small group that included Aroha Mead, Koka Aroha Mead, and Joe Williams. So there were more Māori who attended subsequent meetings for WGIP, the working group. And every year we had respected elders or kaumātua and kuia, such as Eri Hapiti Murchi, Archie Tairoa, Pauline Tangiora, who accompanied those delegations. So then wasn't till 2007 when the drafting was completed. Dozens of Māori had actually contributed to the declaration, and many of them self-funded because they saw the importance of the kaupapa. Many were supported by their iwi or their nations, by their hahi or churches, by families, whānau, and or marae, their villages. An example that Matua Moana gives for that is the likes of Ngāti Awa, who supported Koka Aroha Mead in 1993, when her delegation tabled the Mātātua Declaration on the Cultural and Intellectual Property Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That declaration was developed when Ngāti Awa hosted the first international conference on Indigenous cultural and intellectual property rights. So by that time, hundreds of Indigenous peoples from around the world were travelling to Geneva every year. And with them, they brought their own histories, their own whakapapa, genealogy and rights, their own histories of their own human rights struggles and their own battles against colonisation. So Matua Moana always says that oppression never defined their indigeneity, but it was a common experience which united us in our resolve to have a declaration reaffirming our humanity. I fear I might have gone off topic, which I tend to do, but it's important to note though that Māori, although New Zealand initially did not agree with the UNDRIP, Māori people had made significant participation and inserted ourselves really into that space, given that it's, you know, its importance. Even though that drafting process was difficult and frustrating, and many governments actively opposed it, they never resorted to the old characterization of Indigenous as non-human, but instead we were the kind of peoples in whom rights might vest in international law. And Matua Moana Jackson has taught us so much in that space, and people like Tina Ngato actively work in upholding our rights really as Māori, as being the, you know, the people who have the importance that we, you know, in terms of the Treaty of Waitangi, we have those rights, and that, you know, we did seek international recognition after 1820, but we never hear of that recognition. We never hear about Māori rights predating the treaty, which merely reaffirmed them. So there is that contentious proposal within the declaration for governments, which was the demand by us as Indigenous peoples that it reaffirm our right to self-determination. So the whole history of human rights is based on the idea, right, that we don't have, or that we are not human, that we're still not quite human, and we were denied that right, and our very existence as free peoples was being dismissed. So as you know, as community people, as collective nations, we have a right to the collective nature of that, as understood by us as Indigenous peoples. It was never, I think, that the view that the declaration was somehow lesser right when it applied to us is, you know, is frustrating, in that the costs are huge. We even had, you know, in my experience within the Indigenous Women's Caucus, and incidentally, I've self-funded to get to my first caucus hui meeting in New York, to participate in the Permanent Forum for Indigenous. I remember the importance really of keeping our women, our Indigenous women, safe, and by protecting them, by not posting photos, by not giving out information, and that was simply because they would suffer from being disappeared by their governments when they returned home. So those are, you know, there's so many sacrifices that Indigenous peoples make. You know, the simple fact that the cost of getting to New York and being able to participate fully in the UNDRIP over those 2 weeks is huge, and the financial issues are huge. I mean, I remember grandmothers who travelled from the Amazon basin, and some of them had been travelling for over 2 weeks to get there, and hearing about the challenges that they faced, only to then be to return back to their countries, to then face continued oppression by their governments for their right to speak on behalf of their peoples, for their right to be supported by communities who would fundraise for over a year to ensure that their matriarchs were able to speak for them, to be their voice within the Indigenous, within the permanent forum. But, you know, despite all of that, our resilience has never wavered. For Māori people, our celebration and jubilation was obviously delayed because New Zealand, Canada, United States and Australia were the only 4 states that opposed the declaration in its final form. But I remember when I first got to the permanent forum, I remembered one of our rangatira, or one of our ancestors, our elders, who travelled to Geneva in the 1920s, also said, and I quote, "The halls of this palace are not yet ready to hear our voices." Sometimes, you know, when we think about that, I remember those words ringing true in my first Indigenous Women's Caucus meeting, that the words of my elders, who I went to ask for support and their mandate to come and speak, and being told, yeah, you go to those big halls and find out what's going on in there. So there's a new generation of Māori people. There's people like Claire Charters, Tracy Whare, Catherine Davis, Moana Sinclair, and who have all become articulate advocates for the declaration.
And can we, maybe we can move, thank you, maybe we can move to Brian.
Yeah, because I'll keep going, sorry.
No, that's, I think you gave us both from your heart and from history. A wonderful presentation about the Maori, and in the dialogue section, I'm sure we will have a lot more to discuss among all of you. And Brian, I know that you're going to speak to focus more on the local communal layer of this, so that is a wonderful flow. Please, Brian, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Again, my name is Brian Manangya. I come from the village of Munkabi here on the Hopi Reservation. I belong to the Fire Clan people. And just coming at it from I guess a grassroots standpoint, I've been going to the permanent forum for numerous years now with 7th Generation Fund, and just being there to witness and participate and see what happens in those halls during these specific meetings has really been an eye-opener for me in ways that I had to try to figure out how do I navigate these spaces, what am I there for, and what can I do in this space while I'm there for you know, this period of time that we're there, but I also look at it through a cultural and you know, a cultural lens too, because I grew up hearing about, you know, all these stories about you know, what is to come in the near future, what's going to take place, and in some of those stories it really talks about these places, about a meeting place that, you know, people are going to come together and talk about what's going on and what's happening to our peoples. And sure enough, the halls of the UN, I guess it was that meeting space that they had talked about, years before that, when years way before any of this was thought of, our ancestors knew that, this is what is yet to come in the future. And so, I go and I participate and I think about that, I'm sitting here in this hall, being a part of history, but also walking into those prayers and those discussions that our ancestors had about what was to come, and it's here, and this is that place that we're meeting in. So now I have to kind of figure out, well, what's my footing here? What's my purpose? What's my intent? Because when we go and we discuss and we talk about these things, yes, we're there talking about the rights of Indigenous peoples. We're looking at the future of our people, but we also have to remember that we have to be the current voice, but also continue to be those people to put those prayers and those hopes and those dreams of a future that we want for all people. And that's part of what we have to do as Indigenous peoples there in those halls, is we have to remember those stories and those ideas that come from our own homelands, because in a sense that this work is not being done just for near future, but we're looking many futures in many years into the future, and so we're going to be those ancestors laying that groundwork down for what is to come. And the other thing that I also think about is, okay, so I'm here participating on an international level. So what can I do on the local level? Because there's a lot of good information in this declaration that we could be using on a local level to help further some of the fights that we're engaged in, from protecting sacred sites, protecting our homelands, and so forth. So how do we begin that conversation? And more so just speaking locally about, what I've experienced here at home. And to me, it's kind of hard because I think, our people have lived here for so long, and people don't often have an opportunity to travel to these venues. And so to me, it's kind of like something that's a little over our heads, but I feel that, it has to start somewhere. It needs to be brought up locally. And we need to start talking about this, because this eventually trickles down one way or another. And so I am a constant participation. And I also remember those words. Our uncle Oren Lyons always would tell us that, we're not at the table, we're on the menu. And so that's why it's important for us to be there and to engage and listen to what the government is talking about, what they think is good for our people. In reality, we know what's good for our people. And so we have to be there to stand up and defend what's rightfully ours. And so I guess in a way that that's what I've learned, and that's what I have tried to carry myself as being as a participant there at the permanent forum. I did have an opportunity to go to Geneva this past year, but that fell through. But sometimes I just think about it as that opportunity will come again another time, and maybe it wasn't the right time. So again, like I said, I have to think about those things. And so how can I thought I had scanned it, but there's information out here, and I don't know if you can see it, but Seventh Generation, along with many other people, have put out information. And so things like this we carry around with us, and we need to use it we have it available, whether we're going into meetings about this or that, and we want to refer to something out of this declaration that'll help us. It's here. And so those are some of the things.
And
that
would you
I've
remember
been-
to put it in the chat after your presentation?
Yes, yes,
Thank
okay,
you.
okay.
Keep
Yeah,
going.
but I think overall, like I said, my continued participation for me, I feel like you know, like I said earlier, is that we have to be there. We have to continue to stand, but also put those prayers out there that the work that's being there will be good work, and we'll see it come to fruition many generations to come. And so I hope to bring some of this back down to the local level and begin to use that so that we could be strong in what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to do to protect our homelands from what's knocking on our doorstep. And so that's my hope and that's my dream, and that's the reason why I continue to participate in that, both physically but also spiritually as well, because the work there is important and it needs to continue. We need to continue to be those ancestors to put those prayers and that work into what's going on there so that we benefit from it many years into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Today's last speaker, not least, but is Stan Rodriguez. Please stand. The floor is yours, and there's so much for us to discuss already.
Oka, ipanya mate pe cham. Samanya chuhinya makopai wuskonan. Pele helikonya ba nebara nya matayom. Peyenya sholok hirte como. Bienvenidos a todos. Mi nombre es Stan Rodríguez. Yo soy Ipai Cumiar de Reserva Santa Isabel, aquí en San Diego. Y por esa junta es muy importante. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stan Rodriguez. I'm an Ipai Cumiar from the San Isabel Reservation. We are one of 12 reservations here in San Diego County that represent the Cumiar Nation, along with 6 more reservations in Baja California, Mexico. And wanted to talk a little bit about this. On this declaration, yes, the United States just did not want to sign it. And, you know, one of the reasons why they didn't support it is they believed that nothing would supersede the Constitution of the United States. This document that was created by free people, for free people, allegedly. However, when we talk about this, and then I have gone to the UN, talk about a decade of indigenous languages to speak, and I'll tell you what my opinion of that is after. But when we talk about how, you know, the treatment of Native peoples throughout the world, and the speaker from New Zealand, I want to thank you for sharing up, talking about the doctrine of discovery and how it has impacted Native people throughout the world. And with that, we are seen as less than throughout, you know, this world. That document has continued to be used as an instrument to subjugate our people, to disenfranchise our people, to just, you know, keep us and, you know, just basically discount us and our whole organic science, native epistemology, our culture, everything. The policies around the world have been policies of, if it's not outright extermination, then use as slave labor, and policies of assimilation and termination of our people. As my colleague Brian said, we need to take a look at, the future too, and what was going on. But before we can take a look at the future, we need to take a look at the actions that have taken place in the past. For our people, the Kumeyaay people, our people have endured 3 waves of encroachment. First, with the Spaniards weaponizing religion through the missions, attempting to use us for slave labor. Our people retaliated, burning down the missions, killing the priests, and fighting that went on for over 50 years. After that, when the Mexican government attempted to control Native peoples throughout Mexico, and California was considered part of Mexico back then, they attempted to use Native people again as subservient labor. Our people struggled, we fought, we almost succeeded in driving the Mexicans into the ocean 3 times. Last time they were at the west side of San Diego waiting for a boat to pick them up. Then the Mexican-American War took place. The Americans, they won the war, and the governor of California, the first governor, Governor Barnett, created bonds to facilitate militias to go and harvest Native people. 50 cents for a child, $2.50 for a woman, $5 for a man. Over $1 million was paid off. Killing. It was a policy of extermination. It was a Holocaust that took place out here. When that started becoming out of style, they decided that they were going to decide what to do. The United States did not want, when the United States and Mexico finally agreed to a ceasefire and ending the war, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was created. And in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, it said that all Native communities residing in land that the United States has taken will be honored by the United States government. Well, Brian, as we know, Jeff, as we know, the United States had no intention of honoring any of this because we were not considered citizens. That didn't happen until 1924. So, what was said in the Doctrine of Discovery? What was said? Native people do not have the right to own land. We can occupy it, and only Europeans can bring wealth onto land. So this was the policy that was taking place. So huge land grabs were happening. However, the United States was making their own policies as they went along. One of the things that happened in San Diego in 1850 was they were charging taxes on Native people who are not legally citizens. So when the American Revolution took place, what was one of the reasons for that? No taxation without representation. Well, it started a revolt here in Southern California. That revolt was squashed because Native fighting Native, and that was shut down. Active debate in the state legislature, state senate on what to do with the Indian problem. Some wanted to continue with the process of extermination, the policy. Others wanted to move all Native people. Guess where they wanted to move them to, Jeff? Good answer. Indian territory, Oklahoma. We could have been your relatives, neighbors over there. But they decided to create treaties. 18 treaties were created in California. The Treaty of San Isabel was created January 7th, 1852. Promised us a reservation from the Mexican border all the way to Riverside County and from east of El Cajon all the way to the desert. This was happening right before, on the eve of the Civil War. So there were a lot of people coming in from the Carolinas, Georgia, that had Confederate leanings. They squashed that treaty from happening. So our people never abrogated on any provisions of these treaties. However, land grabs continue to take place. All this continued after that. Boarding schools, and in the boarding school era, if you spoke your language, you were punished. All the boarding schools were created in order to kill the man and kill the Indian and save the man. That was the policy. They wanted to exterminate our culture, our languages, and assimilate us, and then basically terminate the reservations. And later on, that policy was implemented after the Hoover Report in the 1940s. Now, for our people, we were having not just problems here in the United States, but our counterparts in Baja were having the same problems because the Mexican government had also adopted the escuela bilingües, or bilingual schools, indigenous, and they were doing the same thing. If you want your children to do well in school, then don't teach them the native language. Just use Spanish. Over here with English. These policies and the crackdown on religion, which took place, did not end until the Freedom of American Indian Religion Act was passed on August 11th, 1978, and it still wasn't really implemented until 1993. So basically, we've only had 30 years of full protection from the federal government. Now, with that said, all these things, what I seen when I went to the UN forum was, and if some of you may get your feathers ruffled, I heard a lot of talk. However, to me, what I got from it, that if we really want to make a change, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Brian, is we have to do it at home. In the end, we have to do it. We have to empower ourselves. We have to be able to stand up for our rights and be the police for that. You know, some of the things that we're continuing to have as we speak, we have a border wall that cut right through our territory, traditional Kumeyaay territory. And we have been going to the border wall to protest that, to continue working with our counterparts on the other side of the border on past, repass issues. On the United States-Canada border, you have the J Treaty. That gives protection. Our treaties were never ratified. Like I said, we never abrogated on any provisions of those treaties, but they are not honored by the United States government. So what that means is we continue to struggle, we continue to resist, and we continue to hang on to what we have and to put the pieces of our culture back together. When I say that, we talk about our culture being like an askai, a pot that through 3 waves of encroachment was shattered on the rocks. However, we have those shards. We can grind those shards down into a powder that's tempered. We get new clay, we grind that, we mix it together, we make a new pot. It has the past along with the present, and we make it for the future. So that's a little bit about our situation over here. And again, I just want to commend each and every one of you speakers for everything that you've said. And it really touched my heart. And Brian, thank you for the medallion. I really appreciate that. And I am done.
So,
Okay.
because we are now opening the dialogue among us, and I think this has been such a rich set of presentation, even without Hannah in Australia being here. I might say some things about that, but I really don't dare. But I think we spoke about the indigenous people's responsibility to create the declaration. Then we spoke about the governments finally signing to implement it. But as Brian and Stan just pointed out, a lot of the implementing activities have to be done by Indigenous peoples themselves. And that's quite common to victims in general, that victims have to fight for their rights. And even when the rights are on paper, and even if when the rights are formally adhered to, victims have to keep fighting for implementation. And a lot of the implementing work has to be via, just like Stan said, via empowerment that hopefully those rights give people to do the work at home. That's quite a bit to do. But I thought it would be a good idea for us to reflect on it together in a less formal way than the presentation themselves. So I don't think there has to be a particular order, but because we started with you, Jeff, we might as well start this part. Do you have questions to others? Any thoughts were inspired by other people, by the other panelists? Anything that you would want to say to emphasize on your part?
Yeah, Widow, thanks for that. No, I appreciated all the panelists' content and what they brought to the conversation. To where really bringing up those new voices that are coming to the forefront, but also celebrating those who have struggled before us. And Brian and Stanley really talking about, it's all about the local. It's all about what's going on in our community. So for me, it's about our everyday actions. The rights discourse can really only take us so far if we're being realistic. It's ultimately about those responsibility-based actions that we take every day to ensure that our land is protected, to ensure that our languages are spoken, to ensure that our ceremonies are practiced, despite what protections may or may not be there. And so, I think UNDRIP is a tool. It's like a lot of things, and it has some real potential. But because it's a declaration, it's not a treaty, right? So it's not enforced in international law in the same way. We have to find ways to hold states and hold different colonial entities responsible for the words of UNDRIP. And legislation is one way. Other ways are even doing our own treaties with ourselves. I really like the Buffalo Treaty that was signed into place with the Blackfeet Nations, and as Blackfeet Nations across the US-Canadian border to celebrate and to protect the buffalo. And so that was it was a treaty between Indigenous peoples and the buffalo, and started with.
You will put it in the chat, of course.
I will put it in there, yeah. And it was first signed in 2014. With 8 signatories, it now has over 50, right? So other Indigenous nations are coming into this treaty to celebrate, but also to honor that sacred relationship. And I think more of those types of treaties and really actions can illustrate how we take our responsibilities are and I think Brian and others said it really well. It's about our spiritual connections to these these animal nations, to the plant nations, to really our relationships that we have, that we hold dear and that promote our health and well-being. So I'll put more on the Buffalo Treaty, but yeah, thanks for
Perfect. That. On the Buffalo Treaty and anything else you can think of, because first of all, we in the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma want to have all of these in our library, right? Because we aim to be the resource for anything multi-generational. We already have, this is also we also have hundreds and hundreds, actually, references to work and studies done with and by Indigenous people. So, and we are only enlarging the network, such as today. Okay, so please, because education is one of those things that I would add also, not only educating governments, educating each other, educating the people, educating future generations, and indeed, Tawera, you went both back and to the future. This was a genuinely multi-generational sweep. And indeed, Tawera, if you would speak next, anything to add right now, any questions to the others, any thoughts that the other panelists evoked in you?
Ai, kia ora, tuatai, ka mihi atu ai ki ngā kai kōrero, ki ngā kaupapa, hoki, ka tautoko au I ngā kōrero kua kōrero. I just want to support the previous speakers and the words that they shared with us today. I just, you know, it's quite complex, the New Zealand participation within the UN UNDRIP space. Needless to say, I think that acknowledging those peoples who led that way, and really I just wanted to support Brian with his remembrance and acknowledgement of Uncle Oren Lyons, who we both have the privilege of serving with on the board for the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples. When he says that if we're not at the table, we're on the menu, I take that into my heart and into my practice, my daily living as an Indigenous person with an Indigenous purpose. And I am always reminded, and you know, one of the board meetings we had last year, he was quick to remind us of our role and of the 4 nations that disagreed with this work. I am heartened really by the memories and by the work that has been done by the people that I acknowledged and mentioned, people like Moana Jackson who led the way in that space, to really bring about the change. And I also acknowledge the work that's been done by other successive Māori who worked in that space. And I just think above all, it's an ongoing work and an ongoing journey, and we all have a responsibility as Indigenous peoples to walk in an Indigenous way. And we're always reminded too by people like Uncle Oren of walking in a good way. And so by practicing our culture and by acknowledging our past, and in order to acknowledge the future, and in Te Ao Māori, in the Māori world, as an artist, we use symbolism that reminds us of that, the kōreri, which is two movements, one going back and the other going forward, and one not being able to move forward without going back. So I think that keeping our ancestors and keeping our you know, the acknowledgements and the memories and saying their names and talking about their good works is the best way that we can move forward and practice being good ancestors ourselves. So, you know, I think that just to close, every day's Indigenous Peoples Day. I think, you know, we're all grateful for the official one day a year, but I also want to remember that actually we're Indigenous every day of the year, and we have a responsibility to our ancestors, to our tupuna, to be good ancestors and to ensure that our children, our grandchildren grow up understanding their role and their roles, as ancestors as well. Nō reira I runga I tērā, koira tāku. That's all I have to add to this space. And just thank everyone again, especially to Matua Stanley. Ralph, I had the honour of meeting you and being part of the acknowledgement of your work recently in Monterey at our Indigenous Peoples Conference. Also proud to serve alongside people like Brian, and am in awe of the steps that the path that he walks every day. And great to meet you too, Jeff. Kia ora, mauri ora, good health and well-being to us all.
We're not saying goodbye yet, not yet. Brian, what thoughts or questions occurred to you when you were listening to these other wonderful panelists?
I guess the thing that I reflect on too is I often tell people here at home, you know, with these instruments, that we have to remember that sure, it wasn't created, what we have now wasn't our method back then of doing what we got to do now, but we have to remember that we have to use their weapon against them too. And so, you know, this booklet and everything that, you know, that's available, you know, we have to grasp that and we have to use that because it's a system or a tool they created and they enforced on us, but now we're using their tools to push back and to fight back. And so those are one of the things that I try to tell people here, you know, when I get a chance to have similar conversations. But then at the same time, I also reflect back on who I am as a Hopi person. You know, we're talking about laws that were created, or you know, these things that were created in these different halls. But I also like to just think and remind myself that you know, these are current, these are new, but not to forget our own laws, our natural laws. And being Hopi, you know, one of our laws is the law of the corn. And so when I learned that, and as I grew through, you know, the ceremonial phase of Hopi life, and when I really understood what this was about, I took that to heart, and I understood that in order for our way of life, not just as Hopi people, but you know, as we do our ceremonies and so forth, we think about the rest of the world before our own people. And so we say, you know, sometimes we literally have the world in our hands, and you know, we think about every living being, every you know, everything. And so we have to be careful of how we walk because we can ourselves disrupt this cycle. And so I made it for the rest of my life to be a farmer, because that's who we are as Hopi people. But again, like I said, for us, corn is the law. And so without corn, our ceremonies and our way of life can't exist. And so, and that for us, that was the first thing that was given to us when we got here to this world. And so I have to continue to honor that commitment that our people took in order for us to be in this space, in this land, which was to live by the corn. And so, you know, if we can balance that out and continue to walk in both worlds and utilize the tools from our own way of life and the Western way of life, I think we would have the upper hand in a lot of things. And so we have to continue to work that way, and we have to continue to keep the hope that, you know, what we're working for and what we're fighting for is we're going to persevere. And so that's just something that had popped into my head, and I hope to, you know, with a couple of young people that I'm working with, share this with them and remind them that this is our responsibility as Hopi people. But you know, overall, we all have our responsibilities in keeping the world intact, going, and protecting what we hold sacred to us.
Stan, any additional thoughts that occurred but while listening to others?
Yes, I just wanted to, first of all, although the Australian representative was not able to get on, I just wanted to reach out to the people of Australia, and Noggara people, the Gamilaroi people, the different indigenous groups out there. I just want to take off my hat to all of you. You know, the work that you're doing on, you know, cultural preservation, language preservation with the Gamilaroi people. I remember there was 2 people left who still spoke your language. I don't even know if they're alive anymore. But a lot of the work that you're doing in order to reverse language shift, to revitalize your language, your culture, and with all the things that have been going on with your mission schools, your rabbit-proof fences, you know, the lost generation. I just want to say, Chahaya Khan, I think very highly of all of you. And then, you know, I wanted to move, Jeff, I've been to Tahlequah. I have seen the vitality of the language over there, and, you know, your people, you know, even with all the things that have happened, your focus on culture and language and sustaining that, you know, I just want to say, Chahaya Khan, you know, praise you for that, you know, your people. And Dawera, I've been to New Zealand, up to Hamilton, where had the privilege of meeting many of your people out there, and just seeing the vibrancy of your language. And, you know, the Maori language is the official language along with English. You know, the pride and everything that, you know, you have, and your people have not given up. You know, your people hang on to your culture. You know, I mean, that, you know, it is inspiring. It has been inspiring for me. And even the things that you've done, how you were able to, your people were able to share how you did things, and, you know, creation of immersion schools that even touch over here in Kumeyaay territory. A lot of things that I've learned, I brought back. So I just wanted to share deepest respect for you and your people. And Brian, you know, just wanted to share, you follow the law of the corn, your people's culture, your people's language, your people's, you know, spiritual beliefs are intact despite all the things that have happened. And strong, and you continue to do that. And also you're an inspiration for me, you and your people. And I just wanted to, share that with you. Many times, I've talked with Hopi people, and I'm just impressed by the connection that you all have with your culture. So Chahayachan for all of you, and for for all of you, you just really empower people. And one of the things that I say is, when we speak our language, that is an act of resistance. When we carry on our ceremonies, that is an act of resistance. When we continue to reside in our traditional territory, that is an act of resistance. And that act of resistance is built on love for our culture, our people, and our relations who have left us, who are watching us as we speak. And you brought up something that Oren Lyon said, that you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Well, I've been on the menu before, and if they take a bite, my wish is that they choke on it and they don't have any milk to wash it down. So I just wanted to share that with that, and the only way we're going to do that is by continuing to practice our cultural belief and hold fast to it. And this resistance is a resistance that's built on love for our people. So I just wanted to share that. And last thing I want to say before I shut my snoot is that some of the languages that have gone dormant in California, people, and not just in California, but around the world, people may look at that as it's something that's lost, but it can come back. It can come back. I'm going to throw Yael under the bus right now, that in 1947, 48, when Israel became a state, Jewish people from all around the world were coming. They did not have a language that could unify them. So they revived the Hebrew language, and now it is a vibrant language. So the point that I'm making to everyone is this, that even if we've, things have gone dormant, we still have the power to revive it and bring it back together and continue to grow strong. Just because you see only an ember, that doesn't mean you can't blow on it and fan a fire again. So I just wanted to share that with all of you. Thank you very much.
And I want to tell you that you're bringing me to tears. Thank you for reminding. Well, I speak Hebrew every day, so yes, we revived our language, and there's nothing like it. I totally agree. It's to sing your identity in. But I wanted to add, if I may, Stan, you were talking about these acts of resistance. They're also acts of blessing. They're blessing back and they're blessing forward. And they are also acts of generosity. What you just did now, you included me in the conversation as well, right? In my heritage, in my roots, in our victimization, in our transformation. That also included coming back in order to go forward. So we very much share that. But to make a stronger point about your generosity, because I believe there is that in common too. We share the commitment to generosity. If Brian says it, put the world ahead of us, right? For example, so much of what you say is so generous, even when you're real mad and angry, when you say it. Today, the United Nations, for example, And I'm totally cognizant and agree with Tawera every day is Indigenous Peoples Day. How else can one live, empower, and progress, right? But what's interesting that came out today from the UN right now, a few minutes ago, Indigenous Day celebrates youth shaping a sustainable tomorrow. I'm going to forward it to all of you, and I ask Shai, please put it in the chat. There's a whole article about this. And the reason I'm bringing it up is despite the suffering, despite the anger, you expect of yourself to help the world. And the world expects of you to help the world. The world lost its way, and it lost its way in terms of how to sustain itself for the future. And of course, who are the teachers? And there's a real paradox. Think of COVID. Every result of any malady that came out of COVID hit Black and brown people the worst. In America, in the United States, it hit the Indigenous people the worst, probably across the world. We had some webinars about that, and I invite you and I invite the audience to watch all the webinars our working group on Indigenous people prepared about Indigenous people history and healing. So there's a lot more work to do. A lot more work to do in terms of healing. I'm wondering if there are any questions from the audience or any comments from the audience. I see mostly what you help me here. Let's see. Theodora Tongas asked us to please spell out all the acronyms. Oh my God. That's a tough job. Again, Tawera, I don't want to put it all on you, but please do your best. If you mean UN is United Nations, UNDRIP is United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. These are the two that I know because that's part of my daily language. I'm wondering if we have, do you see any questions? Anyone in the audience would like to raise your hand or to ask a question or to make a comment? Yeah, there is a thank you to all the speakers, which is lovely. Okay, I see from Michael O'Connell in Australia. Hi, Michael. Michael says here, an Australian former commissioner for victims' rights is watching and importantly listening to this informative webinar. Naitialia, thank you in Kaurna language. You're welcome. Michael, I am sorry that Hannah couldn't connect literally. I don't know how that could happen in this modern day and age. But Theodora is asking, is there a way to save the chat? I don't see the symbol to do that. And ICMG LT gives you the way right after you asked. There's another thank you. In Tawara, we are total agreement. Making conscious choice to protect who we are as Indigenous people necessitates acts of resistance. You're quoting Tina. I absolutely agree with you. But don't forget the blessing that is in that, please, for me. Because it is a blessing. We will post the chat in the file. And Ida, thank you all for sharing your wisdom, hope, power, all blessings and love to you and the work you do. Ida is very dear to the center. He is the he actually runs our library. So whatever you send to us, Ida, who is also Indigenous originally and still is. So please, everything you send our way, Ida will take care of. So thank you, Ida, and thank you for being with us. I do feel bad that Hannah couldn't really join us. I had been to both Australia and actually was a guest in Australia's governor's house, who was the first Indigenous governor of Australia, and was a very good friend. And we lost him, I'm afraid. I've been to New Zealand too, Tawera. I loved every minute there. And I've been to Rotorua and have a lot of art and blessings from there. I'll have to revisit after we are fresh now. I'm wondering if there's any last word you want to leave participants. You sort of did, but give yourself a deep breath and ask yourself, is there anything else you would say to yourself in 2 hours? Oh, I should have said that. Yeah, Tawera, that is the most important blessing. Be a good ancestor.
I'll just say I've been really inspired by all the panelists and powerful words. I really like the talk of resistance. I think of it as resurgence as well. You know, we're seeing our communities resurge. We're rising up, and it's no accident really that 80% of the world's biodiversity is being protected by Indigenous peoples. Right. 6% of the world's population is protecting 80% of the world's biodiversity. It's not a coincidence. It's not an accident. Like, we have those sacred relationships. I think in the same way, we have to recognize that there's connections. Of the 7,000 or so Indigenous languages that are spoken, where they thrive is also where biodiversity, where those relationships also thrive. What happens to the land and the water also happens to our bodies, and vice versa. And so recognizing that those connections are very real, and that's where we're seeing people on the front lines every day, protecting their territories. Whether it's in Cherokee, we only have 3 of our stomp grounds that are left that are active. And when the colonizers first came, there were 55 stomp grounds. And of course, we've been removed, right, from our original territory to Oklahoma, but we're keeping those 3 strong, right? And that's the seed of our governance, our Gadugi, our notion of camaraderie. So I think I'm really so happy to hear from everyone about the struggles of their own nations, but also the ways that they've overcome those struggles. And I think the only thing I'll end with is really maybe two things. I think each nation can claim UNDRIP in their own way. So there should be a Cherokee Nation version of UNDRIP, maybe in our Cherokee language, right? So we actually put it into our language. It's going to take on a slightly different meaning. I think it should be really tailored to each individual nation in that sense, so that it's meaningful, so it's relatable, but most of all, so it mirrors those responsibilities that we have to place. And I think, as everyone has said so powerfully, we are spiritual people. And Henrietta Mann, who's Cheyenne Sundance woman, has said, we're not humans seeking a spiritual path. We're actually spiritual beings seeking a human path. And so that to me reflects where we're at with this struggle. At the end of the day, how will our ancestors recognize us as being Indigenous, but also how will future generations recognize us as being Indigenous? And that's gonna vary by nation, by community, but those are the questions I keep at the forefront. So, thanks.
Stan, I'm going to let Brian speak last. Go ahead, Stan.
Well, I just wanted to say again, you all inspire me with the things that you do and all that you bring into this group. For me, it is a love and our spirituality that have us go forth. And it's many times it is not easy. Well, it is not easy to take the high road, to speak about injustices that are being done. And there are things that are legal, but they're not moral. And many times we may do the moral thing, but it may not be the legal thing. But what is it in our hearts that we really want to do? What is it? And what I said was basically, when Brian, you were talking about the prayers. Our prayers are very important because they come from our heart. And our actions are our prayers. We believe it comes from our heart, then we follow through on our beliefs, our convictions. So I just wanted to say that. And again, thank you everyone for everything that you've shared.
Brian, young one. Brian, you have the very last word.
Taora, did we get you already?
Almost. I think so. She even could be a good ancestor.
Well,
I
I
think Brian wants to hear more from you.
don't. I'll see her in a couple of weeks, so I'll hear more from her.
Good.
I don't know.
I hope all of you will remain connected to the center and to our working group on Indigenous people. Your wisdom and your spirit is invaluable. So please stay with us. and Brian, please.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I guess I hope whatever I had offered was, what we were talking about. But I guess the last thing I could say before we all depart is that, may you all take care of one another, and continue to do what you're doing. And that, just continue to be the good ancestor that we're all striving to be, so that we have a good and fruitful future for all, despite what we're what we're dealing with right now. But that's it. That's just it. We have to continue to bring hope and make sure that whatever we're doing now, we plant those good things, for the good things to come in the near future. And I hope that we can continue to carry ourselves in that way in anything that we do. And may we continue to thrive and see our prayers that our ancestors have put out for us come to fruition through our actions. And so may you all take care, and may we continue to live a long and happy life till whenever Creator decides to take us. And may we be successful and fruitful in everything we do. So again, take care, and let's continue to remember that we are people of the earth and we have a responsibility. And let's not forget that. Let's take care of one another and ourselves as well. So take care.
Amen. And thank you. And you take care. You belong with us. And I can't wait for next time. Take good care of yourselves, please. And anything you can think of that you need the center for, just you know the address. And when you come to New York for the forum, we're here. We'll get together. Thank you, thank you.
Wado, thank you.
Toda Abba in Hebrew.
Oi, kokwe.
Oh, hey, nya jejehan.